Welcome back to the table, friends. I'm your humble host, Grady Ems, and with me, as always, is my co-host and co-conspirator, Owen.
Hello.
You are listening to Tabletop by Night, a weekly podcast where we continue our exploration of Vampire the Masquerade. Tonight, we're gathered around the table to answer the question, what else stalks the world of darkness?
I mean, my guess is lots.
Many things.
Yes.
Maybe we should ask the question, what else does not stalk the world of darkness?
Who stalks the Night Stalker?
So, as a game, Vampire led to success with the company, and they just developed more sister games. So games that ran alongside Vampire. We've talked about
Same
that.
universe.
Yes. Now, although those games didn't exactly jive with each other mechanically in some editions.
At all.
Later editions, they kind of tried to do that. So in spirit, they all took place in the world of darkness, though. So in the stories that we tell in the world of darkness, these other creatures need to be at least rationalized or contended with. These are optional, sometimes villains, sometimes compatriots that you can put into your game that offer unique challenges to the kindred that sit at your table. Some of them can be sources of information, sources of very strange opportunities. Others are very, very deadly threats.
Some of them make vampires look like tiny little children.
Now, to keep this in scope, what we intend to talk about is the things that are either part of 5th edition Vampire or that are likely to show back up. So there are things that we may occasionally allude to or bring up that we're used to in Chronicles of Darkness, but we'll kind of try to make the distinction when they show up. But to start with, we're going to talk about the Trinity, kind of the core three that always exist. And with the pillar of vampires already established, we're going to move on to essentially probably the other most well-known pillar of this group, which is the wolves.
Oh, that's right. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean... So in the world of darkness, werewolves are shapeshifters who change from human to wolf form, adopting many intermediate forms if they so choose. They are physically more powerful than most living creatures and are immune to many of the ailments and diseases that plague their human and wolf cousins, but they're still living beings and they still can die. So they are not, in fact, immortal. Contrary to many strange shows, myths. Yeah, these are not immortal werewolves.
Isn't silver bullet.
Werewolves heal much faster than normal humans, and as half-spirit beasts designed for battle, they're exceptionally hard to kill. Most werewolves are theoretically capable of reaching the 100-year mark or even beyond, although it's a rare occurrence, however, that a werewolf has the luxury of dying from old age. They are pack animals with a complex tribal social structure. Werewolves are expected to embark on quests and missions to help the sept and tribe, guard cairns from attack, and lead and look after those lower in station as their litany requires. Most vampires regard werewolves, or lupines as they call them, as feral, chaotic beings that, if not controlled right, can do serious damage to unlife and limb.
Just don't go in the woods.
And don't tell them that either. Like, oh, you're just a feral being. You guys are so cute. You guys go back into the woods because, you're not going to come dig up my haven, are you? Oh, God, you're big. Oh, no.
Why? How come when you touched that building, it started crumbling?
That's a weird thing. Did you disappear? I mean, I have aspects, but you're not around
just
here.
Gone.
Also, most vampires who do know of werewolves note that most werewolves stay out in the countryside. Therefore, interaction between vampires and werewolves tend to be minimal, as vampires mostly stay in the city. Vampires and werewolves are brutal enemies, with werewolves regarding vampires as servants of the great enemy, the worm. The Gangrel clan are often said to have forged alliances with werewolves, although this is usually far from the truth. In general, the Gangrel are simply familiar enough with the lupines to know how to avoid dealing with them entirely.
Yeah.
A werewolf, or another weird creature, who has been turned into a vampire is referred to as an abomination, and both werewolves and vampires generally seek to destroy it.
Poor guy.
Yeah, abominations. So, I mean... For many of you out there, you probably are surprised that that's a thing, and we now know that you didn't grow up in the 2000s.
There's a very particular cinema masterpiece, perhaps.
Yeah. Specifically, Underworld is the reason why I bring up that they're not immortals, because in Underworld there's like they're like, oh, werewolves are immortal too, and I was like, you've basically created a world where vampires have a downside and werewolves have no downside.
Yeah.
Like no,
except that they're ruled by the vampires.
Yeah. So like the free werewolves, like once they broke free, like why wouldn't everybody want to be a werewolf?
Yeah.
Like you get immortal, you like don't necessarily have to feed on blood, and you control your transformation, and you can walk out in the day. So just there was no reason not to be them.
Yeah.
Like that was a weird thing, but I knew they wanted the legacy of like, no, we want the same person to show back up instead of like a new generation of werewolves.
I just remember the big controversy at the time when the first Underworld came out was whoever was at the reins of White Wolf at that time was threatening to sue them because they said that they had basically stolen their intellectual.
You infringed on werewolves and vampires. Yeah, that's a long line of lawsuits. That's a lawyer. That's some lawyer who's like, man, I'm going to milk this for
Yeah.
We're going to be caught in litigation. So anyway, there are good things to take away from that a little bit. It's a weird way of saying it, but they did get a couple things right. Mm-hmm. For the average vampire, a werewolf is a force that they really cannot contend with.
Beat your ass.
I mean, werewolves are more subtle than just saying that they're all dedicated to physical aggression, but just like vampires are all slightly hard to kill because they're dead, werewolves are all pretty freaking strong. Mm-hmm. So werewolves have a lot of themes that run through that game, a lot of like shamanism, tribal spirit kind of stuff. So there is a litany of magics and things that they can explore, but like inherently they pretty much all can go werewolf and start ripping vampires apart.
Yeah.
There's also a common trend for people getting into the vampire hobby to get into this pissing match of like how many werewolves could a vampire kill or how many vampires could a werewolf kill. And Vampire's a game about role playing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a loose thing. The best I've ever seen is like, yes, vampire meets a werewolf. The vampire's probably dead. A werewolf meets a Methuselah. The werewolf and his clan is dead. Like,
well, it's the way I always thought about it too was, werewolf finds vampire, fucks with vampire, vampire's fucked up, whatever. Vampire finds out where werewolf lives, building development appears in the woods, and woods is torn to the ground.
That's the better way to think of it. Vampires, though, are on a scale of things that eventually over time become far scarier than werewolves.
Yeah.
And we've talked about some of that, like when the Ravenos antediluvian woke up and multiple packs of Geru and multiple mages like had to take him
disappeared.
Down. Yeah, so like I advise not getting into a pissing match. But the point is, if you're a young fledgling and you start smelling wolfy bits on
just
people,
leave.
Don't hang around.
Just leave.
Okay. So for the final tet pole of the trifecta here is mages.
Yeah. Well, like
that's weird. No, Tremere not last week. Mages, also calling themselves the Awakened, are one of the 7 supernatural races in classic World of Darkness and the principal characters of Mage the Ascension. In the World of Darkness, every human being has a single spark of supernatural potential. Most people known as sleepers don't know they have this, don't care, and want to get on with their lives as if it didn't exist. Some people, though, figure out what that spark is. That spark is very important because sometimes that potential activates and the normal, everyday, average mortal awakens. What does this awakening mean? Well, it can mean a lot of things. It might mean a conversation with God, the finding of the perfect bit of blotter acid, or the realization of a theory that could have been bothering the awakened for years. In short, you come to a realization. Your belief shapes your world around you. What happens when you force yourself to change your belief? The world changes. Most mages don't come to the full realization of this power. Few to none can handle that awesome power with any certainty or clarity. Most cloak this newfound potential in a familiar form using tools to help themselves along. Some believe they affect the world through prayer, and that God, or the shard of God, the piece of the Creator that is the potential in them, changes the world for them. Others see their potential through the chance and ritual, science and experimentation, or even through martial arts. Still others view their perceptions as the true determiner of their reality and alter those perceptions with drugs, alcohol, sex, or even a really good meal.
Nice.
That's the Sedite talking. Mages are these individuals with the power to warp reality, who know the power they possess and use it to the best of their ability. The problem is, of course, that everyone has that ability, and there are 7 billion people in the world. You can change reality to sort your whims, so can they. You want to fly? They don't believe you can. This conflict in belief between you and everyone else is called paradox. And the consensus, the unconscious belief of the rest of mankind, meters out punishment through paradox. Paradox can cause your magic to go haywire, cause physical damage to you and the area around you, or even manifest as a sentient entity intent on making you pay for breaking the laws of consensus. Mage the Ascension has the Council of 9 Traditions, a collection of groups of like-minded mages who work together against common foes, the Technocracy, a group founded on making the world rational, safe, and free as much of the supernatural as possible, the Nefandi, and the Marauders. Mage the Ascension divides magic into 9 spheres or areas of influence: time, mind, prime, forces, matter, life, spirit, entropy, and correspondence. We are mages of correspondence.
Have you checked your email lately?
A mage's ability to manipulate the world around them is called their areta, which goes on a scale of 1 to 10, although rarely exceeds 5. Vampires rarely know anything about the awakened. Though many elders have come into contact with a mage at some point, it's very rare that a vampire recognizes such a person. Those few who know of the awakened likely view them as potentially useful ghoul at best. Some vampires believe that mages are the disciplines of Lilith, and it's possible that the ancient feud between the followers of Cain and the followers of Lilith may have been passed on to the vampires and the mages. The founder of the Tremere clan, Tremere, was a mage and a founding member of the Order of Hermes. So I love how they're like, vampires really don't know anything about mages.
Except for Tremere.
Pyramid. Tremere. So, what are mages to vampires? It's like they said, vampires may not understand mages, but mages basically, they have access to altering reality.
Mm-hmm.
And their biggest weakness is people who disbelieve that. And a vampire is not a person. This is a very big distinction.
And that's why some vampires live in a building full of people just in case a spiteful DM decides to ram one down his throat. And he does, but he makes it his... That son of a bitch.
Tell me how you really feel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
One day.
Someday the shackles will be unburdened. I will access my true powers. Yeah.
And then he puts him in a position where he has to betray his daughter or let her survive but make her think he betrayed her.
Okay, I'm just going to say that
And then the next game, he spends half of his time knowing she's out there, but he won't let him talk to her because she's angry at him.
This is still one of my best characters. I love everything about that. We've gushed about it, and someday we might tell you folks about it, but mages are cool.
I just loved that her first appearance, and I was just like, I gotta find out if this is for real or not. We have a board on the wall where at the end of the game we're allowed to ask the DM a question, and all he pretty much gets to tell us is yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong. So I basically went lawyer and wrote a small paragraph trying to make sure there was no way around him saying no, she's not, or yes, she is. You know, opposite of what, I was expecting. And I got my answer. I was surprised. I was expecting some, sneezies. I mean, because technically she's not.
Yeah. She's
biologically she is.
Yes.
But technically
she is the potential daughter that you could have had if you had done things differently.
Yes.
Ooh, that's a fun game. I'm looking at all 6 lines right now, and I'm just like, yep, that was fun. There's nothing like when one of your better players goes up to the board and starts basically thinking really hard and writing out like his thesis, and you're like, oh, okay, this is gonna be rough on me. I gotta think about this.
What's your prouder moment, that or me just yelling "fuck"?
No, 100%. I have that on video, so I will go to my death knowing that I had this beautiful moment where I watched just like weeks and weeks of gameplay just crystallize in your head, and just everybody. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't like the pure like, ego that like I laid something out that made enough sense so you came to it on your own.
No, it was me completely ignoring something that I totally forgot about. But you realizing I forgot about that and putting the pieces in front of me even, but for some reason I just shoved those out of the way and said, no, my preconceived notions are correct. There's no way this has anything to do with that.
So tasty. Dick. Yeah, another part of it too was that you immediately kicked into action. Everybody that was playing had no idea what was going on. And just the storyteller and one player knew everything just at that moment. The gates opened up, the player was awakened, and he's just like, well, I know what we need to do. Don't worry about them, they're dead. We can go on.
All we have to do is name some names and we're good.
Yeah, we're good. Let's go take care of stuff. So good. That someday, we'll go into discussions about that someday.
Absolutely.
Okay, but back to vampires and mages
aside.
Mages are scary. Like I said, a vampire who encounters a mage in like a diner with a bunch of people around probably has a pretty good edge and probably can, even maybe be a little bit pushy. Mages who know what vampires are probably don't want to be around them unless they're by themselves. If a vampire approaches a mage by themselves away from normal people, he's dead. I don't care who you are, unless you're top tier blood sorcery.
Or you get the jump on.
Yeah.
And they're dead before they realize they're dead.
Yeah, exactly. So it's once again, I think the whole pissing match is just not a thing that the vampire and World of Darkness is meant for. And mages are kind of a light switch. Either you have the advantage or you're dead. So don't be combative.
Yeah.
Make them fun.
Yeah, they're similar to werewolves, where if you're playing vampire and a werewolf shows up, it's just like, oh shit, this just got serious. I need to be careful. And, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
If a werewolf shows up in full Garu form and is screaming, you're probably over with. If a fucking mage walks into the room with a flaming broadsword, you're probably in trouble. But, it's just one of those things where it's just like, hey, I can fuck you up if I wanted to, but I choose not to. It can just be another character in your game.
Yeah, almost all neutral ground, it's more like mutual assured destruction.
Yeah.
So these real life, the real life kind of way of handling is probably more applicable, where they're just like, look, I don't want to get into what'll happen.
Right.
So let's just find out what you want and what I want.
A lot of paperwork involved.
But I definitely can be kind of interesting. It's also very interesting if you decide to be a storyteller, and especially if you had a group for long and you want to start introducing more of those elements in, because at least in our experience through Chronicles of Darkness, some of the stuff is very interesting when you get into their separate worlds and how they interact.
Yeah.
Like the whole concept of a mage or a vampire being like following a werewolf into the Shadowlands or the spirit world, that was really interesting. And our storyteller at the time did a really cool job of like why they didn't want those people to be there. And that was cool. So there's a lot of fun that can be had. Just don't turn it into like a, power trip.
My hot take, I honestly wouldn't recommend mixing the game.
Yeah.
If you're playing vampire, play vampire. If you're playing werewolf, mage, play werewolf or mage. Don't mix. You might have a guest appearance, that kind of stuff, but unless the game is specifically modeled around those interactions, then I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, like a SCP style or government game where everybody's mixed.
It's really fun.
Something like that. Yeah. Okay. So now that we've gone away from the trifecta, we're going to go through some of the other ones. And once again, these are the ones that had books previously. So currently only Werewolf and Hunter, who we'll mention later on, have 5th edition books. I'm assuming mages are probably going to show up relatively soon. And then maybe eventually these others will too. But they did have books in previous editions, specifically in Vampire, the Masquerade's Day, not Requiem. So Wraith. A wraith is a ghost, the soul of a person who has died unfulfilled and now haunts the Shadowlands. For some reason, known or unknown to the Wraith, they are still tied to the living world, the skin lands, and cannot pass to the ineffable afterworld. They are the subject of the Wraith, the Oblivion role-playing line. Wraiths are confined to the underworld, a parallel reality which is tangentially connected to the living world, but distinct with its own laws and physics. Oof.
You okay?
I don't know, that was hard. About 5% of people become wraiths after death in time of relative calm. Far more times of great calamity and suffering. For example, there were about 1 million active wraiths in the London necropolis before the Great Maelstrom. In the world of darkness, it is plausible a sizable percentage instantly become specters at the time of their death. Physically, a wraith is a coherent body of plasma, the substances that make up the majority of the underworld. Plasm is a non-material stuff that houses the wraith's soul and which the wraith unconsciously shapes into a form resembling their living body, often somewhat exaggerated and incorporating death marks. The wraith's corpus, the body equivalent, can be changed by mullate or through soul forging and has only a loose relationship to what the living would think of as a body. Most wraiths are solid plasma, which is to say that if a wraith were chopped in two, there would be no internal organs, just a consistent mass of stuff throughout the entire body.
Very, very detailed stuff.
Wraithly bodies are subject to their own distinct metaphysics. In the Shadowlands and Tempest, they obey local rules of gravity, but under certain conditions can pass through material objects, informally called the Rule of Ouch.
The Rule of Ouch?
Yeah. Plasm can also be used to manufacture objects, and many of the items in Wraithly society are comprised of other wraiths. The Wraithly mind is divided into two parts, the psyche and the shadow. After death, the negative self-loathing and self-defeating parts of the Wraith's personality form a distinct archetypal personality of their own. This personality, the shadow, is in communion with the darker forces of the labyrinth and serves as a constant foil and antagonist to the psyche. The psyche, in turn, is the Wraith's original personality, or at least the parts of its personality that retain its humanity and sense of survival or will to live. Wraiths have a higher, positive personality as well, usually termed the Eidolon. In modern era, the Eidolon is generally fairly weak due to the severe suffering and cynicism of the world, and most wraiths are only marginally aware that they have them.
The world is angry, and so I hurt.
The pain. Pathos and angst. A wraith's psyche feeds on pathos, the energy of emotion. Each wraith has several passions, the emotions which are most tightly connected to its personality. Experience these emotions, even vicariously, provides the psyche with the energy that wraith can use for various purposes. The shadow also has energy called angst, which it can acquire by fulfilling its own passions. Wow. There was a time in every person's life where this resonates so much with me.
I feel this. They really understand me.
These dark passions are generally contrary to the wraith's own goals. So, life cycle and type of wraiths. Wraithly status is defined by a combination of age, maintenance of one's fetters, and willpower. The lowest form of a wraith is a drone. A wraith that does not have any willpower or personal identity. Drones are condemned to eternally act out their personal tragedies and are tightly bound to their passions and fetters. Having no personality or self-will, they are usually converted into raw materials as soon as they are found. Self-aware wraiths begin as infants. When a person dies, its soul is reborn in the underworld covered in a layer of plasm called a caul. The caul acts as a cocoon that keeps the wraith docile until it is removed. A few wraiths removed their cauls themselves, but the majority of cauls are removed by another wraith, traditionally called a reaper. Young wraiths are called lemurs, with the distinction between a young and an older wraith primarily being fetters. A domem is a wraith whose fetters are all destroyed, preventing them from staying in the Shadowlands for any period of time. While domemhood generally implies age, a wraith can become a domem while still very young, and all that it requires is that the fetters be destroyed. A gaunt is an older wraith who has resolved one or more of its fetters and still maintains them. Gaunts are significantly more powerful and generally more canny than domems, and are constantly more respected in wraithly society, though there are rare exceptions such as the Death Lords. The final distinct class of wraiths are specters, which are wraiths who have absorbed by oblivion. Specters have their own society, and from the wraithly perspective are mostly hostile entities out to destroy the other wraiths. So yeah, we gotta admit we didn't play this game.
No, we didn't.
So there's a lot of stuff that we're hoping one day we'll explore and read up on.
Yeah.
We do know that talking about the Giovanni,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the Lasumber a little bit, we did read into a little bit of how vampires interact with wraiths. For the most part, I think if you're playing a Vampire Chronicle, you're not going to really know about them unless the storyteller knows a lot about wraiths and wants to throw them in kind of as a boogeyman,
Mm-hmm.
or you're playing one of the clans that's going to interact with them. Now on to something that's more of an immediate, tangible threat to the vampire.
Ooh.
The imbued, also called hunters.
Wow. Hunters.
So hunters are the protagonists of Hunter the Reckoning. They are ordinary humans who are awakened to the presence of supernatural monsters through contact with the messenger at the time of crisis. During this moment of imbuing, an individual sees the true nature of supernatural creatures or events and either takes action or resolves to do so, confirming their status as a hunter. Those who hesitate or recoil do not become imbued, but are forever aware of their glimpse of the supernatural. These failed hunters are generally known as bystanders.
No.
Is that kind of cool?
Yeah.
I do like that, actually. It's really cool because, like, in that one moment, you're like, I thought I saw someone one time, and he walked out of that diner with a kid, and I don't know what happened to that kid, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But you live with that little thing in the back of your head, you know, but, like, the person who got up and walked out after them, I do like that.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
For most imbued, the hunt begins during an otherwise normal, if sometimes stressful, experience. Another day at the office, watching a parade, a backstreet mugging, but the potential hunter's life was changed when he or she hears the voice of the messengers uttering a single short phrase that focused their attention as the true world was revealed to them. An office worker may be revealed as a zombie with dry, flaking skin and gaping wounds. The mugger may be glimpsed with a hideously descended jaw containing huge canines, marking him as a vampire. Perhaps ghostly, nightmarish figures are glimpsed controlling participants in the parade. The glimpse of true reality, even during an imbuing, is often exaggerated, and most imbued do not see things quite the same way afterwards, even when piercing illusions by calling on their conviction. Hunters debate amongst themselves the reason why they are chosen by the messengers. It often seems to be random. Most imbued feel compelled to act against the monsters which secretly control the world, and some consider this criteria enough for the selection, but they are still entirely human in mind and body, and many do not feel up to the task. Normal social interactions become difficult. Many hunters hear the voices of the messengers, but even without this schizophrenic whispering, their knowledge of the truth can make them seem insanely paranoid in a world which denies the supernatural, and very few hunters have the power to reveal the truth to others. Once imbued, hence there's the rub. Once imbued, however, there is no turning back. A hunter can never forget the hidden evils of the world, and their conviction and ordinary consciousness will drive them to combat it. Conscience. So, interesting. So, the nature of messengers is hotly debated among the imbued. No one really knows what or who they are, where they came from, or why they oppose the monsters of the world. The messages they whisper into the minds of the imbued, often as a voice in the head, but sometimes as a vision or writing on the wall, are simply poorly understood. They are personalized, unique to each hunter, and nearly always cryptic, especially the messages received during the imbuing. Sometimes they describe a supernatural being or problem. It does not breathe. Their will is gone. Sometimes they give a directive. Inherit the earth. Burn it down. Okay.
I just keep hearing that one over and over
Is
again.
that really from a messenger or...
I mean, I was at the drive-thru window at the Wendy's and I just keep hearing, burn it
down. Some hunters receive many more messages from the messengers than others, while some are reluctant to share their own messages. As with so many of imbued existence, uncertainty is the only constant. So, here we go. Powers. Hunters are specifically not turned into supernatural creatures when they are imbued. They still need everything a normal human does and can't take aggravated damage. All they are really given are abilities which allow them to resist, in various ways, the power of truly supernatural enemies. Only two types of supernatural blessings are bestowed upon hunters by the messengers: convictions and edges. Conviction is a reserve of strength and faith hunters may draw upon to resist the control of supernatural entities and pierce their illusions. Depending on the success of their activities, hunters' conviction may rise or fall from night to night. Conviction is risked when used to fuel powers granted by the messengers. If they fail in their task, hunters' conviction is lowered, while if they succeed, it may be increased. When conviction is at a sufficiently high level, a hunter may permanently bolster one of their virtues, gaining a more concrete faith in an aspect of the hunt. Doing so lowers their ordinary conviction until such a time as their newfound virtue can be tested.
Ooh.
And edges. Edges are usually minor supernatural powers granted by the messengers. In general, edges allow hunters only to resist the effects and defenses of the supernatural, though some certainly have more dramatic effects. Each creed has its own set of edges, though a hunter will only ever be granted a limited number during their career. More powerful edges are only granted to hunters who reinforce their commitment to the hunt by bolstering their virtues, becoming more zealous, merciful, or visionary. The most powerful edges are thus only granted to hunters who become virtually insane, obsessed with the aspect of the hunt above all other aspects of life.
That sounds about right.
Such hunters are extremely rare, since the imbued rarely live long enough to become so devoted. So hunters, once again, mortal.
Yep.
Mortal person who may have abilities to screw with your vampire abilities.
Yeah, like abilities that just straight up negate being a vampire.
Yeah. So if you really think of it and you go through the clans, like, let's say a Ventru. A Ventru could be a very challenging opponent. Yeah, very persuasive, but very challenging opponent for someone dealing in a situation, right? Mm-hmm. Like we've talked about them having incredible fortitude, the ability to draw attention to themselves, the ability to tell people what to do. But like if a Venture ran into a group of, let's say, 2 or 3 hunters, they may have people in there that basically negate the Venture's ability to be persuasive, and another person who anything they pick up becomes aggravated damage to a vampire.
Pretty much.
So all of a sudden the Venture becomes like, oh, I got to get into a fist fight. And that was not something that I trained on in my 200 years here. Mm-hmm. Once again, if you're like an elder, a Methuselah or something, you're probably not as worried.
Yeah.
Like you may be like, wow, man, that hurt. But like you're still probably going to come out on top. However, especially for like fledgling vampires, you know, some hunter who has the ability to see through all your illusions or spot you in obfuscate and is walking around with a shotgun is about as deadly as they can be.
But again, they're just humans, so you can be walking around with a shotgun and just be like, none of my powers work. Gun, go.
Yeah, as soon as you know they're there, it's just like, well, I'm just going to hit you with a car. You know, like, becomes more of a thing, and you have the edge on time. But hunters are an interesting thing to throw into the mix. I think Vampire Bloodlines, they had the hunter in that club. Well, and he's like waiting for the guy. And very much, you know, someday we'll go into it and start talking about hunters, but like, you know, the source material, all you gotta do is watch Buffy or any other like self-righteous, like Van Helsing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you pretty much have Van Helsing right there.
Yeah. So it can definitely be fun, especially if they're just like the clueless hunter who just is not interpreting the messages right, you know, and they're really fixated on going after like the poor like woman that lives at the bottom, you know, the bottom of the stairs, you know, right. And you're just like, yeah, she's totally some creature of the night.
I'm totally gonna get my convictions going.
Yeah,
you've been edging all day.
Okay, so hunters do have a book. And like I said, we'll probably go into that since it's a 5th edition book. But now we're going to transition to another one, changelings.
This one's interesting.
All changelings are born to humans. Before they realize their heritage, they live in a half-reality, catching glimpses of the dreaming that never fully realize themselves until the prospective changeling experience the chrysalis. Once a baptism was necessary to extinguish the fey soul, but nowadays, banality is often strong enough to undo a child's fairy soul through other means. There are exceptions, as some side that returned during the resurgence forced themselves on humans, casting out their souls and overtaking their lives. Within their fairy selves, all changelings reflect a legacy, an archetype that reflects their seelie and unseelie part. Acting according to their legacy grants a changing back willpower. Once the Fae were immortal and unrestricted from the passage of time. With the beginning of the shattering, Fae and mortal bodies learned that they had aged like humans did and would eventually die if no preparations were made. The seeming often reflects their actual age, but not necessarily. By remaining within a freehold, changelings can avoid aging. Doing so, however, carries the danger of insanity and bedlam. Other changelings therefore play a dangerous game in how long they can stay inside a freehold and how long they can survive exposure to the banal world. They play their cards right, changelings can outlive mortals by centuries. Often that can mean changelings need to abandon their mortal lives at some point. True immortality has been resigned for the elusive Sayo-chan, who have managed to balance their mundane and fairy sides with each other. Changelings are often divided between the fairy mean and their mortal seeming. Their seeming reflects the outlook on the dreaming and banality and how they deal with their dual natures. The mean is a reflection of their fairy self, reflecting their kith. From their kith, each changeling inherits a birthright that grants them a special ability to call upon. When threatened, changelings can call upon the weird to invoke a force called the Dragon's Ire. A nimbus of fire along with mystic winds that stir their clothing surround changelings and let them appear more dangerous and majestic to their foe.
Ooh.
Within a changeling reside two forces. Glamour is the expression of the dreaming, allows a changeling to interact in chimerically reality and cast cantrips. Banality, on the other hand, allows them to withstand the dangers of the dreaming. Changelings are connected to the spiritual three-folded dimension called the dreaming, which draws its strength from human dreams. Deep within the dreaming lies Arcadia, the fabled home of the Fae. Western changelings are one of the few supernaturals with regular access to the dreaming. Most other Fae access regions of the Umbra instead. So, all changelings are affected by the ancient bane of the Fae, cold iron.
Mm-hmm.
Its presence makes changeling ill at ease, and cold iron weapons cause horrible, smoking wounds that rob changelings of their glamour and threaten their very existence with final death. It is so distasteful to changelings that they can sense cold iron in their immediate presence. Likewise, just as they inherit a birthright, their kith also carries with them a frailty that they cannot lose. Changelings' dependence on twin forces within them means that they have to maintain a balance between the two. Too much banality is a sure way to become undone, i.e. condemning the Fae soul to a true death, and cause memory lapse of the changeling's fairy self. Too much glamour, on the other hand, leads to the madness called bedlam, in which a changeling completely disassociates from the mundane world to live in a chimerically fantasy lands. In recent times, changelings also contend with a kind of glamour that is drawn from darker places called nightmare glamour, which becomes more powerful the more a changeling tends towards bedlam.
Well,
changelings are subject to a phenomenon called the mists. Originally a pure expression of the shapeless world the firstborn molded according to their designs, they became polluted with banality and now act as a separation between changelings and the dreaming. A changeling that is too often affected by the mist forgets who he was, eventually becoming undone. As a side effect, the mist also keeps the world of changelings hidden from mortals who rationalized chimerical incidents away from those that were enchanted before.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. So the version of changelings that we were introduced was a little bit different.
Yes.
Because in Chronicles of Darkness, changelings are people who are taken to the Fae and then changed. And then when they tried to come back, which could be years, hundreds later, they found themselves replaced, and they were trying to contend with their altered selves, and could they get their lives back, and this whole kind of thing. I think the older version of changeling was a lot different, and it was actually people like kind of awakening. It very feels like it might have a little too much to like connect with the mage.
Yeah,
like there are some overlapping things there, but I'm sure people who played both games probably are like, no, they're pretty distinct. Yeah, so what are changelings to vampires?
Nothings. I would say nothings. Like I feel like a vampire would just be like, oh, those exist?
Yeah, it's more, I think it's very much of a thing like vampires generally, many of them are in control of their social environments, and a changeling could definitely be in control of the social environment.
Yeah, you're right.
So they're probably more like, wait a second, I'm dealing with a player at the table that I don't recognize.
Mm-hmm.
So like, wait, like in game, they're kind of trying to suss out how someone could have influence in different ways.
Right.
And maybe that end up running into something that just confuses them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, generally, if they get the blood, they're going for an acid trip.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
So, you got to taste all the flavors of blood after a while. Changeling blood probably does some pretty interesting things. I don't think it's as strong as like the LCD effects of mage blood, but it probably has more of like a lingering effect on the vampires. Probably makes you really, really clamorous.
Well, it's like I feel like mage blood is like the hard stuff, and like this is more of for the refined palate.
Changeling blood's probably like the thing that basically turns you into a rock star.
Yeah,
like everybody just starts paying a lot of attention to. Still cool. Hopefully, like I said, in a few years, maybe we'll have a new edition of Changeling to dive into and to talk about. So I think we have two more.
It's going to be a lot.
These last two, well, anyway, this one's for a buddy of ours who drug it out of the the depths and decided that he wanted to be part of it. Demons.
Ooh.
So the Elohim were responsible for the creation of everything, including humanity. However, God had special orders for them. The Elohim were to watch over humans, but never make themselves known. The war in heaven began when an angel named Arimal, one of the Nibiru, foresaw a disaster in the future, a disaster which God had either directly orchestrated or would allow to happen. The angels debated whether or not to act against God in order to prevent this disaster. Many argued that it would be safer to do nothing, because their action could potentially be the cause of the disaster. The angel Lucifer was the first to make a conclusive decision in favor of rebellion, and he became the leader of the rebel angels. 1/3 of all angels sided with Lucifer and tried to prepare humanity for the impending catastrophe by accelerating its development. These fallen revealed themselves to humanity in order to bring them the light of knowledge and awareness. In so doing, they incurred the wrath of God, who had given humanity the potential to be aware of the word, the good and evil, yet had not intended man to have this kind of awareness yet. The first of humans, Adam and Eve, had been given gifts that they could not use due to their initial innocence. A child's happy because he is unaware. And the games, Adam and Eve are portrayed as having had only rudimentary knowledge and awareness, solely concerned with their survival. During the war that followed, the sin of Cain taught the fallen how to kill, and many grew twisted and evil. For this transgression against the Creator's wishes, the fallen were cast out from heaven, and creation was devastated. After a lengthy, increasingly atrocious war with the loyalist Elohim over the fate of humanity, the fallen were finally defeated when the Babel project failed and severed the link between the fallen and humans. The defeated and former Elohim were cast into the abyss and lingered there for untold eons. In the end, Arimel's vision was true. By abandoning God and misleading humanity, the rebel Elohim caused it to become a shade of what it was meant to be. Then the walls of the abyss cracked during the sixth great maelstrom, and the fallen started escaping back to the material world.
So what are these maelstroms? Because you mentioned letting a wraith too.
Yeah, we talked about it in the Giovanni. So basically, the maelstrom was like, maelstroms generally happen when so much death occurs that the realm between the living and the dead, not the abyss,
right,
but between like the Umbra or the realm of the wraiths grows thin. So like specifically the maelstroms that occurred like during World War I and World War II, and then the maelstrom that occurred during the turn of the century in which the Giovanni's, like their spirit, the one Giovanni was killed, and basically all the wraiths that he had tied to his will and everything were released, and like so many of them were dying that eventually the Cappadocians came back and stuff. Yeah, so Maelstrom is basically like a spiritual storm.
Gotcha.
Thing to note is basically Demon was like one of the last books written, from what I understand, in like the original kind of age of Vampire the Masquerade, and they never really fleshed it out. Like, they have access to powers that are unscalable.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
just like loosely described kind of stuff.
Yeah, and stuff like, oh, if you get enough people to like worship you or inspire faith in people, then you can like rain fire and calamity and turn a city into like Sodom and Gomorrah kind of thing. And you're like, I don't know how you would play that.
Right.
Like, making them as some sort of like antagonist in a setting makes sense, but putting them as a player, it's weird.
It sounds like every character in the campaign would have to be the main character.
Yeah,
like, and I'll be fighting for it.
They try to balance it as like, oh no, you're not like, you're playing a demon, but like you're possessing a person, so there is some sort of balance in basically your representation of it. But like, we don't have any personal experience, and we don't know how really that would fit in. We're going to, because somebody made a decision and we'll live by it. But like, so last of all, so we can end this little jaunt through all the different factions, all the different races of the World of Darkness, the mummies.
Ooh. Are the mummies alive?
The mummies are called the Undying or Reborn, so I'm guessing they're not alive. Are immortals whose bodies who have been ritualistically preserved and granted the power of self-resurrection. I guess they're alive. The most well-known mummies in the World of Darkness are the mummies of Egyptian origin, which were created by the spell of life. Their original population was divided into 4 dynasties: the Shemsu Haru, the Kabari, the children of Apophis, also called Bane mummies, and the Ishmaelites. And it remained as such until the creation of the Amenti in the wake of the 6th Great Maelstrom. While most of these mummies were created to serve the forces of balance, Mot, or to enact the will of the divine patrons, the eldest of these, the Imku, were once followers of Isis and Horus in ancient Egypt. A select 42 devotees of the latter are anomaly zealous part of Horus's formal war against Set and Apophis, and are referred to as the Shemsu Harun, the followers of Horus and supposedly adherents to the so-called Code of Horus. Not all mummies, however, were or descended from the Egyptian undying, nor do they all serve the region's cause or that of Horus himself. Those like the Capacoca, which originated in South America, and the Wu Tian, which originated in China, are deeply engaged in their own machinations.
So it's just got mummies all over the place.
Yeah, so kind of hard because we're talking from third-party information here, but from what I understand, like the old World of Darkness basically really had this concept of like horror punk.
Yeah.
Right? Gothic horror punk. So like even though vampire was like kind of your gateway into the whole thing, a large portion of your interaction with the World of Darkness and all these supernatural creatures was like you as a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a vampire, everything is kind of crazy, and like seeing these creatures and these people coming up is kind of cool and interacting with them. And eventually, yeah, you get down the list until like mummies and stuff, and that's really kind of interesting. Starting out and trying to pitch someone a game where they're going to play mummies is weird.
Yeah, it really is. And I don't want to say like it feels like they're scraping a barrel, but like it does feel like they're like, oh god, we got Wolfman, we got the Creature from the Blue Lagoon, who else we got?
Eventually they did Frankenstein.
Yep, they did do Frankenstein.
So yeah, I think, once again, if you're looking at these game systems that are probably, who knows if they'll ever get remade, especially when you're talking about like demon and mummies, like that's probably a really cool antagonist, or like I said, like some sort of conspirator that the vampires can get involved with. Having a group play hunter or werewolf or vampire is probably a great thing, probably very fun. Having a gestalt group composed of multiple things is very specific, and you have to know what you're doing, otherwise it's going to become a mess. But it could be fun. Trying to convince 4 or 5 people to play mummy.
Yeah.
Please tell us if you managed to do that, what it was like, because I just don't get it.
Yeah.
So, we'll just leave it at that. Interesting characters in the background, and at one point in time, they had their own book.
Yeah.
So I look at it.
I think all of them are interesting, but yeah, like you said, like I can't imagine playing Changeling. Like, I think it's an interesting idea behind it, but I just it doesn't interest me.
I have a hard time understanding how to play Changeling in an all Changeling game.
Yeah.
Because they're so unique and flavorful, and it seems like you end up in this thing where like too many spices end up giving a bland soup kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like definitely having one come into the game, super interesting. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I think all of these would be interesting to be a little bit of spice to add into an already existing game as like a just someone you ran into, or minor antagonist or something like that, or just, hey, I own the building next door and I just also happen to be a fey creature, whatever, like that's interesting, but like as a game by itself seems, I don't know, maybe that was the point. Maybe they kind of saw it as like, hey, let's just mix these all together. But then again, they didn't really make the abilities mix, like the yeah.
It's interesting. I think a lot of the stuff kind of got tacked on as White Wolf kind of grew.
Yeah,
like you said, and they kind of grew to accept these things. Like later on, there is actually also a book dedicated to the Kuei Jin, which we talked about, the Asian vampires. So like that was not just like some accessory book. That was like a whole game system where you could use those rules, which were very different.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely things, but those definitely feel like you've already done the circle around the core, and you're trying to be like, what else can we give you options for?
Yeah. But
you're probably not going to start in any of these.
Yeah.
Like I said, or maybe you do. Who knows? We're not telling you how to have fun.
No.
We're just telling you our goofy, often mistaken opinions of things.
This is how we feel. It does not necessarily have any effect on how you feel.
Okay, so this was a little bit, we're actually on time to have a normal length episode, but let's push it a little bit.
No.
we're going to keep up a tradition that we've done a couple times so far, and we're going to give you a character that we've created for our game and try to get some feedback on it, see if you guys like this stuff.
All right.
So this one's mine. Once again, at the end, I'm going to have to wait to say the final part because it's very tied to clan. So we'll give you some time in between there. And of course, if you ever feel like the need to chime in, and then also like, who do you think this person is? But I think that all like it's spelled out in the last paragraph.
Yeah, I know, but you kind of said that about the last one too, and it was so strong in one direction that it just completely threw me off.
And this one unintentionally is the same way. So like knowing that will probably make it easier to determine who this is.
Fine.
Okay,
it's fine.
So once again, I decided to try to get back to that kind of idea that we didn't do too much previously, but that we both agreed was very interesting of tying history to these characters.
That's good because mine is similar.
Cool. So we're going to talk about a woman known as Sania Benoit.
Okay.
Yeah.
French?
Definitely French influenced here. Sania was born to slave parents on the island of Hispaniola during the late 18th century. Mm-hmm. She was raised on a sugar cane plantation as a young child and was selected for her intelligence and curiosity and brought into the main home to become a house slave.
Okay.
Despite being trained to fill domestic duties and raise the family's children, Sania took advantage of her position and dedicated any time she could steal away towards learning how to read, write, perform basic arithmetic.
Okay.
So, growing into a clever and well-read young woman, Sania found herself in a powder keg of prejudice, hatred, and violence.
I feel like I know where this is going, but I'm wondering if this is the
obvious or
the trickery. Yeah. This is the trickery.
Scattered conflicts were erupting across the island, and amongst the chaos, more opportunities presented themselves. Fleeing from her masters amongst a raid on the plantation one night, Sania was reintroduced into her people, seemingly wild and free, drinking in the culture her oppressors had denied her. Chief among the influences impressed upon her young adult self was a charismatic voodoo priest, Francois Mackendal, who inspired those willing to take arms against their oppressors. Real person, by the way. Mm-hmm. From Mackendal, Sania learned the ways of her people and how to turn them against the colonizers. She created poisons from the island's herbs, passing them secretly to house slaves so they could be put into the food and drink of their plantation owners. She helped organize and track elaborate networks of free groups and connected them to those still bound to the plantations. She even helped prepare the rousing speeches that Mackendal performed like sparks spread against so much dry tinder. When the French finally caught up to the rebels and Mackendal was put to the torch, Sania watched as the fires that burned her mentor lit a flame in the hearts of her people, an inferno that she knew would cleanse the island. Aiding the newfound rebellion, Sania orchestrated a raid on those that had taken their leader away and struck a brutal blow to the French government. During the raid, however, she was made known of an oddity. Amongst the dead and wounded was a man that nearly cost the rebellion their fight. Overcome at the cost of far too many good freedom fighters was a lone, pale figure out of place in the Caribbean island. The strange man of Germanic descent had been bound with heavy irons and staked to the wall of a holding cell once used to hold runaway slaves. Sania was brought in and used her knowledge of voodoo to combat. She was brought in to use her knowledge of voodoo to combat whatever evil powers the man possessed, but it was her keen intellect that presented her with an opportunity. She studied the strange creature, experimenting and learning quickly, realizing the potential of the dead thing's blood. Mixed with the blood of a pig and given to her people's fighters in a ceremonial swearing of oaths, they healed faster, fought harder, and quickly became unstoppable forces of nature. As her people gained their freedom and the country of Haiti was born from the flames of rebellion, Sania celebrated in her position of Manbo, a priestess of her people. During the festivities, however, her once captive broke free and slew those that guarded her. Falling upon her and her new family, a quick and bloody revenge was had, leaving her mortally wounded and dying at the feet of her vengeful demon. Taken back by her ingenuity and resourcefulness, Erhard Werner chose to take a risk and embrace the young woman, in an attempt to capture the youthful ambition and adaptability which had led her this far. Taken away from the delicate new world that she had fought and paid for, into the twisted dark forest of politics and corruption that was Kindred-controlled Europe, Senya was once again molded against her will into a tool of her masters. Again, her natural-born gifts, now considered aided by vitae-fueled magics, led her to rise above her circumstances and make a living out of her newfound life. So there's one last part, but at this point, it's going to become very obvious who she is. But what do you think?
I mean, there's tastes of about 3 different things in there. It started out and like the whole thing you're going on, like immediately I'm just like voodoo. Okay, this sounds Tremere. Like I feel like Tremere might end up in this someplace just because I was like magics, everything like that. But then when you started talking about drinking the blood and everything like that, so Tremere kind of don't have the strong blood thing going on, like they can't blood bond and stuff like that. Because that was one thing I was thinking was like, oh, wouldn't that be badass if they're all blood bonding themselves to this guy unknowingly?
Yeah.
But that's not really a thing Tremere can do. They can ghoul, but they can't blood bond. And they weren't blood bound. So, and then this whole thing with the magics of the vitae and everything like that, I feel like it's Tremere.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a very strong presence, too.
Yeah.
The rebellion.
I do. The rebellion and everything like that, I was just like, yeah, but I don't feel like that's the point.
No, I think, like, and once again, this was not written to trick.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the idea was she had to be Tremere. It's just...
Many themes flow through many different things. One thing is at the very beginning, though, I was just like, ooh, this has a little bit of a Setite tint to it.
Yeah, there's a little bit.
Because as soon as it was the whole part, it's just like, oh, rebellion and blah, blah, blah. I was just like, ooh, I would do that.
So many seeds of chaos, yeah. So many years later, I mean, two centuries later, Senya found herself basically serving her masters in Florida. And once again, she found herself centered around a rebellion and chaos. But this time, the Second Inquisition and the fall of the Chantry in Vienna.
Ooh.
So taking this opportunity, after 200 years, she finally mastered her forces and basically took to her maker and diablerized him, taking the rightful place of Primogen of Miami from him. Since then, she has basically set her rule of kind of enlightenment and meritocracy through the Tremere, but as all things do, power corrupts, and so she is going to be a figure to be reckoned with.
Absolutely.
In the Miami area.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the Tremere Primogen.
Nice. I like it.
So it was good. Like we were going over and I was like, okay, Tremere, how can I get an edge on the Tremere? And like, I know what we did in New York and I love it, but I needed something that was more grounded regional. Yeah. And I wanted a regional flavor.
And it's cool because I don't know what this character is going to be like, but as soon as you started talking about voodoo and stuff like that, I was just like, that'd be really badass to have a Tremere that's grounded in voodoo.
Yeah.
I was like, that'd be cool.
Like, she has played the game of politics, so she's not a fringe idealist who basically studies forbidden magics only, but she has a deep tradition that she knows you have to sometimes look to others for answers and look at different paths.
Right.
So she basically is going to set the tone for all Tremere in Miami. And Tremere definitely are going to be a place where, relying upon the academics only is not going to give you his head, is actually providing like growth and secrets, for her. So I'm excited.
That's cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I basically wanted that. I started thinking about like the type of personality that was cool. And the person that I kept coming to was the voodoo doctor in Constantine.
Mm-hmm.
Like the dude who runs the club. And I'm like, I love that. It's such like, especially when he's in there and he's just telling me, he's like, I am not a man of tricks. Do you know who you're talking? You're like, oh, this is the most fascinating character in this whole scene. And I was like, could I get something of that? And then I started
distill it a little bit, turn into something we can use.
Turns out, I mean, sure, a lot of people listening to this, Haiti is actually one of the only few countries that was actually founded by a slave revolt. It's pretty it's actually got a really cool and dark, but really cool history. Unfortunately, it has not found much stability through the years.
No, it's generally, that's actually a really common thing is nations that are created through revolt tend not to survive very long, or at least not be very stable.
But, well, that's how she got to Europe. Like, so, well, someday we'll return and see Sania Benoit and see, what kind of thing she's getting on in Miami.
All right. Well, that's good.
Well, with that, I think we've hit our allotted time for the evening. And if we go any longer, this is just going to go turn into incoherent rambling. So,
more so.
More so. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, don't do drugs.
Don't do drugs. Don't drink. Do not drink for mages.
Do drugs. Don't go to school.
Drink your milk. Do your milk.
Drink your skill. Drink your school.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time.